From erectile dysfunction to eczema, heartburn to headaches, carpal tunnel to how to lower cholesterol drug-free. Sunday mornings at 10 on Talk 1470 WNN.
The opinions expressed on the following sponsored program are strictly those of the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. Welcome to Stay Alive and Fit with Liz Goodman, a new innovative radio show that taps into what's happening now in the medical industry, featuring fitness experts, foodies, and medical professionals. Get it right here and be an active participant in your health. Mixed messages about what is best for your health can make you feel like you're on a runaway train. So hop on and have some fun while Liz navigates this medical mystery ride. Call 888-565-1470 and ask Liz, your source for the latest medical technology and long life advice. All aboard. Here's Liz Goodman.
Hi, and welcome to Stay Alive and Fit with Liz Goodman. How is everybody tonight? It is Thursday night. I have one of my favorite co-hosts and guests on the show this evening, Dr. Frank Snipes. Unfortunately, Dr. Michelle Kerwin is not here to join us tonight. But as always, I want to thank my sponsor, the Center for Child and Family Enrichment. They can be reached in Miami anytime at the following number. I'm getting it for you, 305-624-7450. They're an amazing center. They help children who do not have families, foster parents. They help children find foster care placed in foster care. So they're a wonderful place. As always, our show is about ways in which you can stay healthy and fit. Tonight, I'm going to be doing, as I will be doing for the next couple of weeks for anybody who's listening, a series on, as we go back to school, what we should be looking for in terms of whether or not our children are doing any kind of drugs and getting themselves into trouble. As I mentioned to any listeners who listen to my program regularly, last week, a very dear friend of mine's son's friend, in other words, her son's friend, overdosed on heroin in her house. It was a really devastating experience for the community, for her, obviously for the family who lost their son. We don't know exactly what he OD'd on. We think it was heroin, but it's just very tragic. He was only 20 years old, and it's just really, really hit me hard. I know that there's so much going on in the press these days about heroin addiction, and how it's no longer like, the back alley drug. It's actually a very prominent, very popular drug in the mainstream, and it's killing our children regularly. I don't remember exactly the number, but I remember last week reading about 170 children died in 1 week in Chicago, which is clearly an epidemic. And I think there was something like 30,000 kids die annually of heroin OD. And I think part of the reason they're dying so much is not because they're doing heroin as much as they are getting this very bad mixture of... Stronger mixture of heroin, and it's being mixed with different agents that are really just killing the children. So tonight I have Dr. Frank Snipes on the show, and one of the things we're going to talk about is if you think your child has overdosed, what can you do at that moment? Is there something you should keep on hand in an emergency that you can give your child? What are the ways that you can be treated if you find out your child does have an addictive problem? And if you, as a listener, want to ask Dr. Snipes any questions, he's a renowned expert in the area. He works for several different rehab centers. He himself has had some issues in the past with some problems where he's been in recovery, so he understands firsthand how to treat others who've been in that situation because of his own experience and coming out the other side. He can explain to children and relate to them as somebody who's come out the other side and succeeded to a place where he's, a well-known, well-liked, prominent doctor in our community. And I welcome Dr. Snipes to the program. I'm really pleased that you're here, and I'm really pleased that you are one of these people that is open to talking about what you've been through, where many people would hide that and not want the public to know. They'd be afraid for them to know. But with you, you carry it, you wear it proud, you wear it strong, and you use it as a way, a very effective tool to help others to get through their pain and issues and come out the other side.
Plus, I think also when you do tell patients right off the bat that you're in recovery, their walls come down, because sometimes talking to somebody who's not in recovery, frankly, sometimes they don't understand. So it makes a big difference, particularly if you're talking to people in a treatment facility. You can see their face change. Okay, now he knows where I'm coming from.
Right.
And that does help a lot. And as you alluded to a minute ago, the medicines that you're talking about, the medications rather, that are being mixed with heroin, fentanyl is a medication, used to be, still is, used for an IV anesthetic in hospitals, operating rooms, and so on and so forth. Now it's being made in nefarious, I guess, labs and whatnot, homegrown, and they mix fentanyl, which is about 80 times stronger than morphine, which is sort of the gold standard when you're measuring the strength of these things, about 80 times stronger than morphine. So you add that fentanyl with heroin, and it makes a tremendously
terrible
potent agent.
cocktail.
There's another one called W18. W18, if you look it up online, is supposedly 10,000 times stronger than morphine.
Sorry,
so
Doc.
No problem. So just a small, tremendously small amount of W18 can cause a tremendously potent IV medication, or for that matter, I guess they could smoke it and so on and so forth as well, obviously. But the gist of it is, any way they use it.
It's a chemical?
It's a chemical. It actually was, apparently they think it started from the Chinese and underground labs, and it's come through this country primarily, as I understand, from Canada. It's not real common, but certainly the police and such are getting more well versed in W18. And in fact, policemen now carry Narcan, which is a drug to reverse opiate overdose. And Narcan, which is called naloxone, basically can be used in several ways. They can give it IV, they can give it nasally, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But basically, they carry now Narcan, naloxone, on their belt. The police.
So in an emergency situation, they can administer it.
If they get there first, they can administer it, and basically, it's part of their uniform, I think, now.
Wait, excuse me for 1 minute, Doc. I just want to be able to give out our listeners the telephone number just in case anybody wants to call. It's 888-565-1470, 888-565-1470. Dr. Snipes is a really informed doctor on how to treat anybody with a drug illness, and also how to get them or coax them into doing the right thing and getting some treatment. So if you do have a question, we can change your voice if necessary, muffle your voice a little bit, or we can have you email us the question so you don't have to feel awkward about maybe your voice being recognized and you want to get a question to Dr. Snipes. You can email Liz at stayaliveandfit.com, and I'll get your email now. And if you want to reach out to Dr. Snipes after the show, he can be reached at 561-799-3680. Or do you want to give out your any other phone number?
I work also at Presti Medical, which is an internal medicine clinic in Fort Lauderdale. And that's, if you want that number, at 954-491-6200. But, that's where I work.
Okay, great. So moving on, you were telling us about this drug, naloxone. So is naloxone something that a parent can keep, or is that really something that has to be administered? It's like kind of parent who has a child who's had a repeated issue with drugs, and they've been to rehab, but there's always those emergencies or those situations where they end up falling off the right path.
Right.
Now, can a parent be trained
Absolutely.
to treat with naloxone, keep it on their person in their house,
their home, or whatever they can? In fact, some pharmacies, not many, but some pharmacies have nasal Narcan, and it's produced, and it's spelled Narcan, and it's basically a nasal. Now, not all of them do.
Like an Afrin?
Essentially, and it's a nasal spray.
But if a patient is OD'd, how are you going to give them a nasal spray? Is it sort of like you're just putting it in the inside of their nasal hair?
You do, because if they still have circulation, obviously they're not.
But they're
passed
not
away.
sniffing it in,
right?
Are they?
But you're going to force it in, and it gets into the nose. The nose has a very vascular blood vessel inner lining. That's why when people get hit in the nose, they bleed so much
Right.
because it's so vascular. It has so many blood vessels. So the theory is if you're still alive, basically you're still pumping blood, and it still gets in the circulation quickly. But I mean, in
Wouldn't
the
that
hospitals,
also-
it could be given IV as well, and you see that in hospitals all the time. They start an IV, give it, as well as emergency medical technicians. One of the first things they do, and I didn't even interrupt you, one of the first things they do when they see somebody unresponsive and they don't know what in the world's going on, they'll give them some glucose, because sometimes there'd be a real low blood sugar, and at the same time they can give them Narcan. Because
Right.
who knows what's going on? Maybe they're...
So it's not harmful to somebody who isn't
No.
overdosing.
No, not at all. Not
So,
at all.
Mike, when you're talking about a very fast way for it to get into your system, I think of the tongue. Isn't that supposed to be the most direct, easiest, fastest way to get into the bloodstream?
It probably is sublingual. The only problem is sometimes it's hard to, if their mouth is closed or if it's clenched or if they just don't, you know what I mean? Or
You can't
the
get in there.
saliva gets in there, and so in the nose it just, and you're done.
Is there a danger in giving it to somebody who, let's say, didn't have an overdose or...
Not really. Narcan's quite, it really isn't, and it's certainly with any potential risk because, I mean, as we were saying a minute ago, these things are incredibly strong, and that's one reason why perhaps your acquaintance, the story you gave earlier, may have had something laced with his.
Right.
Presumably, we don't know, but I mean, it may have been heroin. But if it was, it could have been laced with one of those.
So people wouldn't normally overdose from straight heroin. It's normally if it was laced or if it was a bad
Well, they
mixture.
can. They certainly can because heroin, any narcotic, I mean, for that matter, prescription pills you get at a drugstore.
Right.
I mean, any narcotic can suppress the respirations, and that could be particularly dangerous in elderly people, particularly people with emphysema, COPD, emphysema, and such. So people with sleep apnea, I mean, all they need is just a little extra help, and they're not breathing at all. So I say that sarcastically. In other words, all they need is a little
I understand what you're
more
saying.
inhibition of sleeping, and they're in deep trouble. So, yeah, it can happen with any of the opiates, pills, any of them. It's just that these are extremely potent.
So if a parent is concerned that their child is doing drugs, I mean, what are the signs they should look for that it's not just recreational, doing with friends because they're 10th and 11th grade and they're testing the waters and they're having a couple of drinks or they're smoking a joint? I mean, we all know at some point a kid is going to probably try something. I mean, it's almost impossible these days to not try something. How do you know the difference between when they're doing it recreationally as to be cool with their friends and when they're actually doing it in a way that is harmful?
Horribly destructive,
And
yeah.
also, what is the right age to start having these conversations with children and make them aware of these things? I mean, that was a very big thing for me last week, is I had to sort of have some conversation with my children, and I was a little bit uncomfortable because they didn't even know what drugs are. I mean, they're like, what is a drug, Mommy? I don't understand. So, I was torn between wanting to give them TMI, too much information.
Right.
But wanting to give them enough information so that they would remember that experience and have it to fall back and look back at in their life when they're approached with a drug. And the story I gave last week is my children, for listeners who weren't watching or listening last week, that my children who are 9 and 10 were in the car with me when all these ambulances and police and everybody, showed up, and it was almost blocking us from being able to leave for school. And mine are in 4th and 5th grade, and they were like, "Oh my God, mommy, what's the matter? What happened? Is all the neighbors okay? Or is everybody okay?" And I said, "I don't know if everybody's okay, but later that day, I said to them, no, somebody wasn't okay, and this is why." And I tried to delicately explain to them what had occurred without really strongly discussing it
right.
with them because of their age. But I wanted them to have that moment to sort of look back on for the rest of their life and say, the day that somebody comes up to you and says, try a joint or try heroin, do you remember that day when we couldn't go to school because there were ambulances everywhere and that kid died? I wanted them to remember the way they felt, how scared they were, and never want to, do that drug because they'd have that memory to tap into.
As to the questions when to start, I guess every child has a different maturity level of understanding, but I would think as early as possible that they can understand whether it's 10, 11, 12, and or in their early age group, because they do this in elementary school.
Really?
I would think you hear. I mean, I'm not a pediatrician. I don't see that many children at
I
all.
wish Dr. Kerwin was on the show just for that. But
But
what
it
do you
certainly
mean?
happens.
They're starting at elementary school now?
Well,
That's really scary.
Well, I mean, to the best of my knowledge, I'm more of an adult physician, but basically, as early as you could talk to a child who is mature enough to understand what we're generally talking about as far as medications and that sort of thing, because actually prescription pain medicines can be equally harmful in terms of their mindset. Now, as to... You were asking a minute ago about... I'm getting feeble.
I was asking, I know there was a little bit of feedback from is there something wrong from my producer?
Okay.
You know what, let's take a quick break
Okay.
if we can, and we'll be back in 1 minute, folks. Stay with us, 888-565-1470. Email Liz at stayaliveandfit.com if you have any questions, and I will ask Dr. Snipes for you right now, and don't turn that dial. Thank you for listening.
After the break, our healthy hot topic of the week. Stay tuned to AM 1470 WNN. You're listening to Stay Alive and Fit with Liz Goodman. Introducing VIP Event Production Group. New York, LA, and South Florida joined together to become the upcoming VIP premier event and decor production company. We are an in-house, full-service, quality, social, and corporate design team with a combined 60 years experience. For your convenience, we have a complete showroom with floral, lighting, room draping, and dance floor wrapping designs. Our staff includes event coordinators, videographers, photographers, along with DJs and entertainment. To complement your event, we have an online website with promotional items and party favors. To book your event, call 888-727-8997 or go online to VIPproductiongroup.com.
Hi, and we're back. Welcome to Stay Alive and Fit with Liz Goodman. Thank you for listening tonight. Our guest is Dr. Frank Snipes. He's an expert on drug rehabilitation for children and adults, mostly for adults, for going through any kind of problems with any kind of drugs. And Dr. Snipes is a specialist in the area of opiates. He can help guide you towards getting the help you need. And he's about to give us some pointers as to when is the right age to start talking about this with your children, and what are the signs that an adult or a friend or a family member or loved one has that you need to look out for before you get them into treatment, and how is the best way to approach them to get them into treatment.
Sure.
So I'm going to kick it to Dr. Snipes and let him answer some of those questions for you. We have about 10 minutes left in the show.
We could talk 10 hours on this one.
I know, and we will for the next couple of weeks.
Not a problem at all. Well, briefly, as far as the age, every child matures a little differently, but I would think as early as they can begin to conceptualize medications and drugs and that sort of thing, because if you can arm them with this information beforehand, that's great.
But what age do you think, and I know this is not your area of expertise, but what age do you think is too young? A minute ago you were saying that even elementary school kids are doing some drugs.
I'm sure, and I don't know specifically on that age, but I'm sure that, just like kids smoke cigarettes and they drink when they're in their later elementary school, clearly it's more like in high school and that sort of thing. But I would try to arm them as soon as I can. I will say that people who have had addiction problems or in recovery, their children, I can speak personally to my children, are now absolutely against any kind of drug, narcotic, whatever. They don't drink except just rarely socially.
That's interesting, because I've had a couple of friends and doctors that I know, because this seems to be a very big problem in the medical industry as well, that people aren't even aware of. There are a lot of doctors that are addicted to opiates and painkillers, and they don't, and they don't even admit it to themselves, and it's easier for them to get prescriptions, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
And I have some friends and colleagues that have, been in and out of treatment, and their children have grown up to completely and totally detest it and be very, very anti-drug. And I think that's wonderful. But that also begs the question then, is there a genetic component to this?
There is.
Or isn't there? Because those kids, they know there's a genetic component, so they are going to completely stay away for fear of going down that rabbit hole, you think?
I think it's both. I think it's psychosocial, and such. So I think it definitely has a genetic tendency to it. If you and I could find the gene, we'd be millionaires overnight. If we could find that. But basically, that is, I'm sure, that without a doubt, some genetic component to it. At the same time, like you say, what they're used to, what they're exposed to, and so on and so forth. Let me get back to one thing, and I'll address another issue.
Okay.
As to, you were talking about what age, and then we're talking about what do you look for in
Right, the
signs for people.
signs.
If people just recreationally once in a while use whatever, alcohol, opiates, whatever.
Except some drugs you can't do recreational,
can't,
because
right.
once you've tried them once, it's almost addictive immediately, right? Isn't heroin
Not
like
necessarily.
that?
Some people can, theoretically. I mean, I don't advocate that many stretch of the imagination, but basically, when people get addicted to it, the usual rule of thumb is that they continue it despite negative consequences. So, for example, if somebody is drinking, or if somebody is doing opiates or any kind of mind-altering drug, when do you know that they become addicted? When they cannot stop in the face of negative consequences. They've lost their job, they keep going. They have
Right.
car accidents, they keep going. They have medical problems, they keep going.
So are you saying that the first sign or the last sign of addiction is they start to lose their job and do all these things? I mean, I'm kind of wondering what's that sort of initial sign, so before they get to that point of losing their job and getting into a car accident. Are there certain subtleties
fine
besides
line.
just, the sleeping late, or is there something that is like that trigger to a family member that says, you know what, something, something's not right?
That's a good question with a kind of a difficult answer. There's no real clear-cut moment where you just cross that line. But again, if they continue to do it despite negative consequences, that's a pretty sure sign of addiction right there. At the same time also, there are some people due to genetic factors and whatever, that can use different medications and they don't seem to get addicted. So those are some. But to answer,
Isn't it tolerance as well, though? You build a tolerance.
That's another thing. Tolerance. Right. People that they took 2 and they got sedated, but then eventually get used to that. Now they're taking 4. Then they got used to that. Then now they're taking 10. But let me go back to the other question. The thing that you can find as far as a parent or a spouse or a brother or sister, whoever, is if people, opiates and medications oftentimes make people sedated. They make people groggy. They may fall asleep at the dinner table. They may not be as responsive. Their personality can change. So for the person,
that's the big key, though. Personality changes, right?
And that's why, and that's one of the reasons that AA and Narcotics Anonymous and such is helpful, because when you go to these programs, they know you. They know Joe Smith, and they know Joe Smith's personality. And if Joe Smith isn't acting quite the same, hey, what's going on? So, and in a family, they know you, your husband, your wife, your daughter, your kids, whatever. They get to know you, they see you, so they know you pretty quickly. They know when something's not all. You can fool somebody at work, maybe. You can fool somebody across the street in the neighborhood.
Fool me twice.
Right, but if they know you real well, and that's the value of support groups and so on. Let me say one other thing. We're almost finished. Treatment centers also focus on collateral illnesses, illnesses, mental illnesses, depression, anxiety, bipolar manic depressive disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, gender identity issues.
Is that an underlying cause a lot for addiction?
Well, it's quite often it's a comorbidity. It's an additional linked problem. So a lot of times, my point would be, if they don't in treatment centers, and they're good about this, if they don't identify those comorbidities or those other issues, then quite often they leave a treatment center and they're kind of not treated. They're still in a mess, because basically they didn't get their depression treated, or they didn't get their anxiety treated, or their bipolar addressed, or whatever, or ADD.
I mean, that's the job of the treatment center, right? To figure out the underlying cause. Sometimes it's because they're depressed about something at home. Sometimes they're having issues with their friends. Sometimes, most people with an addictive personality have an underlying cause for that addiction. I don't know. I mean, you probably know more than me, but everybody I know in my world that I've ever met that has some sort of addiction, whether it's gambling, drinking, smoking pot, they have, not smoking pot so much, but gambling, drinking heavily, they have other underlying issues.
Many times they do. And if those aren't addressed, then that doesn't make support good for their recovery afterwards.
So I'm being told, unfortunately, there's only 2 minutes left.
Oh, my gosh.
I'm hoping that next week we're going to get one of your treatment centers to want to be one of our sponsors and join us on this program. I think it would be great for our listeners to start to connect with, a specific location that they can start going to. You're always wonderful, and you sponsor me, and I love you for it, and I thank you for it because you've been a good friend, and I know that you are really, really a wonderful doctor who's very caring, very attentive to your patients, always ready and available to speak to people.
I appreciate it.
After hours, during hours, if somebody needs you, you're there.
It's like 7-Eleven.
A little bit like 7-Eleven. But Dr. Snipes is definitely the right guy. If you know somebody who has a problem, he's an internal medicine doctor, so he can primarily. I mean, he can treat anything, but specifically, if you know somebody with any kind of a problem, when it comes to alcohol, drugs, or anything of the sort, or even a personality disorder, Dr. Snipes is a great guy to speak to. He's extremely effective in the way that he treats patients, and he can be reached at 561-799-3680. Thank you so much for listening. This month is a very serious month, and the topic all month long is going to be about drug addiction, rehabilitation, and ways in which that you can help your child stay away from drugs and say no to drugs. So thank you so much. Liz at stayaliveandfit.com. Like us on Facebook. Check out our webpage at stayaliveandfit.com. And thank you again. See you next week.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dr. Snipes.
No problem. Thank you.
You've been listening to Stay Alive and Fit with Liz Goodman, a new innovative radio show that taps into what's happening now in the medical industry, featuring fitness experts, foodies, and medical professionals. Get it right here and be an active participant in your health. Mixed messages about what is best for your health can make you feel like you're on a runaway train. Get ready to hop aboard again next time for Stay Alive and Fit with Liz Goodman. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of the